Right now, if you have a podcast that feels like a full-time job with no paycheck, you're not alone. It's a frustrating place where many podcasters find themselves at some point along the way. And the reason why it's frustrating is because even though they think they're doing everything right, they're putting out episodes every week, they've got good content, they have good audio quality, all the things that people have told them they need to be doing, they are doing, and yet they still can't pinpoint why their show isn't growing. Jen Edmonds was in the exact same boat. She is a fellow podcast host and PodLaunch graduate who had launched a podcast that wasn't going anywhere, and she was considering throwing in the towel. But then something changed, and she's here today to share with you what changed specifically that transformed her show into an audience growth machine for her business, and the exact shifts that you can make to help you do the same. Welcome to Insider Secrets to a Top 100 podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Elmer. Let's make your business binge-worthy. Jen, welcome to the show. I am thrilled to have you here today.
Thank you so much for having me, Courtney. It is an honor.
Well, I want to start with your podcasting journey, going back in time, really looking at how you used to do things versus how you do things now. So take us back in time to the early days of your podcast, which that was prior to the rebrand that we worked on together, and walk us through what were some of those sticking points for you that really it was frustrating because it was like you wanted the thing to work, but it just wasn't working in the way that you intended it to.
I got into podcasting because I love podcasts, and I thought, what better way to actually get in someone's ear for, 30 to 60 minutes at a time, as opposed to, look, here's a 10-second reel on Instagram. And I thought it would be really easy because I talk for a living. I'm a yoga teacher, and literally that is all I do. And the talking part actually wasn't very difficult because it's just like hitting record, as you well know. But there was so much more to it than that. And I had no idea what I was getting myself in for. I found that when I launched the podcast, it was all very exciting. And, I had put together everything myself, from the name to the artwork to I had to teach myself how to, set up a Buzzsprout account and get everything uploaded into the right places. I really had no idea what I was doing, but I figured it out. Entrepreneurs, we just do all the things. But it just didn't really go anywhere. And the hardest part for me was I just didn't have a good plan in place. I'd be thinking, oh gosh, it's Monday. I've got to release a podcast episode tomorrow. I've not got anything down. What am I going to do? My interviews were very kind of haphazard. I didn't really have a good plan in place as to when I would record them, how I would be editing them and uploading them. It was really a very last minute kind of piece together thing. I didn't see any increases month to month in downloads, or just didn't really get a lot of interaction from the podcast. People clearly weren't finding it. And I would promote it on my social media, and, I'd get my guests to promote it on their social media, but it really wasn't getting anywhere. And that's the point where I thought, look, it's just going to go nowhere. I'm going to end up just, letting this trickle off. And, we've got 15 or so episodes that are just going to sit there and it's not really going to progress. And I didn't want that to happen because, you get an inkling about these things. You think, this is a good idea and I feel like this could be great, but I just didn't know how or, where to go from there. And it was still something I enjoyed, but I was starting to lose momentum. But I could see the benefit from a business perspective of doing it, and not just a business perspective, but being able to communicate and connect with, some of these people from all around the world that I would never have the chance to connect with normally. So I thought, look, I just need to find a better way of doing things. And that's when I came across you.
Well, I know a lot of people listening right now can relate to the fact that, number one, it seems to be a pretty easy medium. It's not too difficult to figure out where to plug in a mic and how to hit publish and how to set up like the logistical aspects of the podcast, especially now that the tech has advanced so much and it's so much easier than it ever used to be, 10, 15 years ago. And honestly, that sets a lot of people up to fail right there. People think that it's going to be easier than it is. And so while the technical aspect and the logistical aspect of getting the show up and running is relatively easy. You said it yourself, I figured it out. It's actually getting results from the podcast that can be difficult. It's so interesting too, because I feel that Ultimately, for us as business owners, when we do something in our business, there's a couple of commonalities that I find across the board, across the spectrum, no matter what niche you serve, no matter what industry you're in, is number one, that we value our time. And we want to see a payoff from that time that we're investing into whatever it is, whether it's long form content, short form content, whatever marketing we might be doing. And then number two, it's that we might expect the results to happen a little more quickly than they do. And I think that's just something else to call out here, with podcasting is as you were having these moments where you're like, okay, this isn't paying off in the way that I expected it to quite yet. I've got these 15 episodes that I don't know if it's worth it to keep going. There must have also been an inkling within you that said, yes, it is possible because I've seen other people be successful with it. And there must have been a part of you then that made a choice to figure it out, to figure out the how, to figure out what you didn't know, to keep going and to actually make it successful. Whereas for many people, that's when they stop completely. So what was it that pulled you forward in that direction to say, yeah, I'm going to figure this out and I want to make it work?
Stubbornness, me being incredibly type A. I guess you said it yourself, entrepreneurs are not very good at being patient. I think that's where I came from. I heard you on a podcast, and it wasn't a podcast about podcasts. And so much of what you said really resonated with me. And this idea of wanting to get your message out there and wanting to help people, because I knew from the small amount of feedback that I had from the podcast, I knew it was helping people. And that's really, from the very crux of it, that's why we got into this kind of work, right? This is why we do this work. So I just knew, I had an inkling, maybe it was just plain stubbornness. I like, well, I've started this thing, I'm going to finish it. So there was a bit of that, don't get me wrong. But also, I'm so passionate about what I do, and it is such a wonderful medium. And I thought there has to be a better way. And I think that when the universe kind of lands things in your lap, when you're not really looking for them, but they come along and they just kind of pique your interest and you think, oh, okay. I think that that's, a possibility. So I think that when I heard you speaking on a podcast, that was the universe just saying, maybe you haven't considered all of the things. And I went ahead with it.
I love that. Okay. So I remember when you joined our community and you were so coachable and you just were going through the motion, you were doing all the things, we're like, here, do this. And I mean, you did it and you followed the process and you relaunched your podcast. You had incredible results. Take us through that process of actually learning the systems, learning how to get those things in place that you didn't have before, those missing pieces. What were some of the frameworks that were the most impactful for you? And then what were the results that came of it?
I think the planning aspect was the biggest part. I'm quite an organized person by nature, but for some reason, I just couldn't get my act together with planning the podcast. It was all so last minute, and I found that really frustrating. So putting a schedule in place, only recording one day out of, the next 2 weeks, rather than I'll record here on a Monday and here on a Friday, and it just wasn't working. So having a plan in place for recording it was incredibly helpful, and just setting aside that time. And then your podcast is done for the month, which was a real bonus for me. It's nice that you say I was coachable, because I just felt like with all of the wonderful coaches within your program, I felt like it's like, just tell me the answer. Just tell me what to do. I'll just do it. Give me the 5-step plan here. And there is a little bit of that, which I really appreciated, because I think you need it. But a lot of it was also, look, we're going to give you the framework and you've really got to sit down and figure out how it's going to happen for you, because no one knows my listeners the way that I do, right? So that was incredibly helpful and really pushed me a little bit outside my comfort zone as well. I think a lot of the things I didn't expect within the program was that mindset aspect, and being able to kind of just reframe how I was looking at things, and that psychology of getting deep into my ideal listener and looking at things from their perspective, as opposed to me, who's someone who's been through it but is on the other side. So that was incredibly helpful as well. So definitely the planning, like the day-to-day, let's just get this on a particular schedule so it's not taking over my life at the last minute. And they're really delving into what my listener needed, as opposed to what do I fancy talking about this week? I think that was the biggest part. And then the relaunch was really great, because it gave me a moment to pause, to step back and say, look, all right, we're going to do this. We're going to do it once. We're going to do it really well. And it was just step-by-step playbook, which was super, super helpful for me. It was just like, well, you put all the steps in place, and I did, and it was done. And it went so well, that relaunch.
Oh, well, I want to dig into your results from the relaunch. But before we do, you bring up a really important point, Jen, which is when you were talking about being coachable. And I feel like, at some points in our journey as entrepreneurs, the further along you get in business, there's almost more of a desire to be like, just tell me what I need to do or do it for me, because we have a lot of demands on our plate. Whereas earlier on, I know I see this in myself where I was willing to learn, I was willing to do the things. And now I'm like, I don't want to learn anything else. I just want to do what I'm good at and not have to worry about it. And I bring this up and I want to acknowledge you because it is hard to take that ownership and to take that responsibility. And yet I firmly believe that it is necessary for us as podcast hosts. Maybe when it comes to other aspects of our business, I don't know, Facebook ads or creating a sales page or something, those are the types of things we can outsource. But at the end of the day, if you are looking to become a top podcast host, there is a certain level of personal responsibility that goes into that. And so it's by intention and it's by design that we actually have certain exercises that you guys are doing versus what we're doing or helping you do, because we want to see that ownership. And it's amazing what can happen when you take that sense of ownership and that pride in the work you're doing. And not even pride, but it's taking the level of which you're serving, at which you're serving your audience, to an even deeper level, showing that deeper level of care and commitment to your community. And it's incredible, but the unspoken energetics of that really play into the success of a launch, the success of a podcast. When we take that ownership, it's amazing how much further and faster it will take us. And I've seen that with your journey. So take us through the launch. What was that like for you? And what were the results that you got from it?
Well, I relaunched with 10 episodes because I thought that when you start a podcast, you just start with one episode. But no, it turns out that wasn't the way to do it. So I had 10 episodes ready to go, which I was quite proud of because it was a lot of work putting all of that together, to release on one day. And I did, a giveaway. I had everyone ready to get into it and write reviews and share the podcast, and everything was in place. And there was one thing you said which really stuck with me. It was really fun doing a launch that didn't have any kind of monetary aspect attached to it. I'm not asking anyone to invest their money or, go into a program with me. It's literally just, hey, can you come and listen to my podcast? Leave me a review. You're going to win a cool prize. So I found that really fun because it sort of took the pressure off the monetary results, which we put on launches, right? So we landed at number 5 in the Aussie chart, which was incredible. And I landed at number 1 in a couple of other countries around the world, in the Middle East, across Asia, in a couple of places in Europe. I think we got to the top 10. It was amazing. So beyond my wildest dreams, it's been consistent ever since. We kind of come into the top 100 within the Aussie Apple iCharts pretty regularly. And then just knowing, though, that I can expect a certain amount of downloads per week and to see that it has been growing consistently over time, I think is the biggest thing there as well.
Well, and I think that's a testament to the hard work and the slowing down to go fast. You mentioned how nice it was to kind of take a pause and reevaluate some things in your podcast. And I think as creators, and even under the external messages that we hear in the world so often as entrepreneurs, especially, that you need to have content going out, you need to be consistent, you need to be in front of your audience all the time, and so on and so forth, that it can be really hard to take that step back. It can be really hard to go dark for a minute. There's still that urgency within, to stay relevant to our community. And that can be hard to do. And yet the growth that you've had, because we've got 2 podcasts essentially to compare to, the one that you had previously and the one that you have now. And the one that you have now is growing organically. It's continuing to rank. It's continuing to build traction, and it's continuing to reach the people that it's meant to reach. And so what a beautiful baseline to be able to continue to grow from. The sky's the limit from here for you, Jen. But comparing that prior to when you didn't have the systems in place, you didn't really have the messaging dialed in, the positioning dialed in, and how much more difficult it was to grow. So I want to applaud you there too, because I feel that this is a tough lesson for people to sometimes wrap their minds around, because it's another one of those intangible ones. We love to see the stats and the results and the numbers and the things. But when we slow down to dial in and do the deeper work, we can move so much more quickly as a result of that. The discipline is in slowing down. So kudos to you on doing that as well. I would love to hear, for those listening right now who maybe are feeling like you did with that early podcast, it's just not growing. Or maybe those who are listening who want to launch a podcast, but they really value their time. And as an entrepreneur, they want to learn how to do it well, but they also want the results from it. What is one of the biggest takeaways that you've had from your journey as a podcasting host, and or any piece of advice that you would love to give to someone who might be sitting in one of those two boats right now?
I think the biggest thing for me was the structure needs to be there. And once that is in place, you can plan the rest of your life around that. When I was launching my podcast initially, I would talk to guests that I wanted to have on the show, and I'd say, oh, hey, when are you free? Oh, we can do Saturday afternoon. We can do Monday morning at 6 a.m. Because I live in Australia, I have to deal with people all around the world. And one thing you said within your program that really stuck with me was, someone really wants to be on your podcast, they will find a time. They will find a time to make it work. Send them your calendar. Very rarely will they say, look, that doesn't work for me. And I found that really fascinating because I thought, well, some of these guests are bigger and more famous than I am, and I've got to kind of bend to their whim. But no, it really didn't work that way. So I think that now when I have this opportunity to say, look, I've blocked out Tuesday, that's my podcast day. I'm going to have 4 episodes prepped. I'm going to do nothing else that day. I give myself permission to step back from doing emails, from social media content planning. That is just my day for podcasting. I get all of that done. It goes off to the editor. And then that's a month's work out of the way, just in one day. And it didn't really occur to me that that was possible before, but it has really changed things enormously for me. The other thing that you mentioned that really sat with me that I hadn't really considered was just getting into the mindset and the psyche of my people that were going to be listening, and really imagining that I was sitting there and speaking directly to them in my room, as opposed to I'm going to write out a whole bunch of notes and I'm just going to read through them and that's what I'm going to talk about today. I was such an over planner and almost writing out some of my episodes word for word, which just doesn't translate very well when you're listening back to it, does it? So that was incredibly helpful for me. The planning piece and that ability to really connect, that was helpful too.
I love all of it. And I mean, it's so funny you bring up the thing about the calendar, because we all have that fear for some reason. It's like, as soon as I put like constraints around my calendar, people are not going to want to do anything with me, and it's funny, but the opposite is true, because it actually creates more of a desire and more of an urgency. It's like, well, this person must be pretty busy. They only have one day open a month, and I'm even pushing the limits now where it's like, let me see if I can get people to book a quarter ahead of time, and maybe I'll push it to a year eventually. I don't know. I'm just kidding. But, it's amazing because some of the things that we think are often not necessarily true. And so I'm grateful that you had that experience and that you have put those boundaries around your time. You have learned to protect that, because in doing so, you've actually elevated the authority of your show just in doing that. So if you're listening right now and you haven't yet done that, maybe that's one simple step that you can take walking away from this episode. Jen, I so appreciate you being here today to share your story with us. You are a shining example of what's possible in podcasting. Keep up the great work, and thanks for being here.
Thank you so much, Corny. Absolutely love speaking to you today.
So my hope is that this episode gave you hope, especially if you have a podcast right now that's been struggling, you have been struggling to grow, and you've been showing up and you've been doing all the right things. And if you want to launch a podcast and you're worried that, okay, first of all, I'm going to spend all this time and energy. What if nobody listens to it? But secondly, what if I miss my chance to start a podcast? Because the market feels pretty crowded and it feels pretty saturated. In the next episode, we're going to shatter that myth. And I'm going to show you what actually matters when it comes to growing your show, and it has absolutely nothing to do with timing. I've got a very special guest from the Buzzsprout team joining me, and we're going to break down how successful podcasters approach growth differently, as well as the skills that you need to be focused on developing now in order to experience rapid growth later. That's all coming up next to help you make your business binge-worthy.